One, two, three, four. Pedagogy a go go. Pedagogy go go go. Hello and welcome to Pedagogy a Go Go, a podcast about college faculty sharing what happens in their classrooms and why. This is Season 3, Episode 4, Remixing to the Tune of Truth and Learning. And we are your hosts, Gina Turner and Tom O'Connor. Welcome back, Tom.
Welcome back, Gina. I want to ask, how was your break? But I feel like this has been the most stressful winter break in history. But
Yeah, I know. It's I didn't go anywhere. I stayed in my basement and now I'm back in class in my basement.
right, there was a lot of shoveling, no travel whatsoever, limited socially distanced family visits, and the fall and semi-rise of democracy. So,
Yeah, there was that as well, definitely.
but
So it's good to be getting back to Pedagogy a Go-Go and getting back to one guest and doing kind of a deep dive with
yeah,
them.
yeah. For those of us, thank you. I want to thank everyone who sat down and listened to our last kind of four-part series. This is a return to, God, this is such a loaded phrase these days, a return to normalcy for the podcast. But we're returning to our original structure, highlighting the practices of an educator in the classroom. We have returned. You'll recognize some old questions, but in the spirit of our guests today and going forward, we've remixed them a bit, tweaked them to speak to the times we find ourselves in, and hopefully keep our guests on their toes.
So I look forward to our conversation with Professor Andrew McIntosh.
Professor Andrew McIntosh, and Professor McIntosh is a Northampton Community College professor of sociology. I know he's been with the college, I think, at least twice as long as I have, for 10 years. He's a graduate of Bard and Lehigh University, where he also, in addition to his coursework here at Northampton Community College, has taught a class there for something like 16 years on the sociology of hip hop. So I think it's going to be a great conversation.
If you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would it be?
Oh, goodness. Well, welcome, Andrew, to the show. It's lovely having you here.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be with you guys.
So I hope
any setting.
So hopefully that introduction was okay. I know you're firmly ensconced within the social sciences, but can you tell us a little bit about the classes that you teach and what is it about your discipline that makes you excited to teach it?
Yeah, I teach sociology, right? And at Northampton, I teach primarily principles of sociology, but I've been known to teach social problems, American ethnicity, and, if forced, deviance.
Now I'm really curious. Why do you say if forced?
It's been a long time. Deviance is it's a course that serves primarily criminal justice majors well, but it's also a course that is born out of, in my mind, 1960s and 70s sort of visioning of sociology. It's very old school. Social problems is similar in that way as well, in that it can be, in my mind, it's still using very elemental theories that are not particularly flexible to the dynamic of social life in 21st century. But my bread and butter is principles of sociology. I teach that course semester in, semester out. And I've been teaching American ethnicity as well regularly for the last several years.
Well, let me ask you this, Andrew. Principles of Sociology is largely a course taught by freshmen. What drew you to sociology, and what do you enjoy seeing in freshmen kind of encountering this material for the first time? Because I imagine it's a very different class than they are used to taking in a high school setting.
It is. Some students actually have taken some sociology in high school. that was where I, in addition to my father being a sociologist, that wasn't cool. But then once I took it in high school, I was like, oh wow, this is kind of an interesting discipline. Um, so there are some students that do come equipped with it, but many don't. You're absolutely right, Tom. And often it's confused with psych, right? This isn't psychology. I thought I was taking psychology.
It's theology.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is that principles of sociology is set up. I didn't realize this until I got rolling. It's a gateway course. It is required for virtually all majors. So there's a certain job security in this, right? um, in the sense that these are classes that virtually everybody takes, and what that means on my end, what is I would say attracted to me about it is I meet virtually every major at
Yeah.
Northampton through through the years, and a wide range of students. So whether it is the sort of freshmen straight out of high school or the non-traditional students returning, principles of sociology is a good first stop. And I love that. It means for a very diverse classroom on a lot of different criteria.
Yeah, as someone who teaches intro psych, it's that same thing. It's a gateway course, meaning that it's a course that's required for many programs, and that it's oftentimes taken in the first semester by freshmen. And when I get to the section on social psychology is when I ask my students in the class, who here has taken sociology, and ask them to try and define the difference between sociology and psychology, because you're right. I mean, and there is so much overlap anyway.
Yeah, for sure. We just had this where I want to say it was last week, we were doing socialization, right? And
Mhm.
in my mind, this is our the perfect time to talk about psych
Mm.
and talk about some elemental theories of psych, whether it's the Looking Glass Self or George Herbert Mead. And then I invite them to talk to me about, so what did you learn about Freud, right? And depending on who they had, I mean, we roast Freud. And what I try to talk to them is like, listen, I want you to know, I'm in no position to tell you whether or not Freud was his findings were valid. I'm not an expert in this field, but what I can say is sociologically, it's clear he's had an impact, right, on Western thought, right, on Western thought. And we then tease out the way that unconscious forces, like, every student sort of agrees that they think unconsciously, or they think they're aware that things occur within them that they can't explain. And I'm like, that's because I spent a lot of time talking about the shift of modernity for Western society. And I'm like, that's a really modern thought, and it's relatively new. And so whether Freud was right or wrong, when you get to the nitty gritty of his experiments, he did introduce these ideas that are fundamental to us, right?
Yeah. I'm one of those psych professors who gently pokes fun at Freud while talking about how he's foundational to the discipline. So yeah, but I definitely know some of my colleagues are like, nope, don't even touch him with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, I think
so. You didn't mention one of the areas, and I'm sure we'll get into it later in our conversation, but I know one of your areas of expertise is hip hop and the sociology of hip hop. But the next question I have for you is, if you had to describe yourself in one word as a teacher, what would it be?
Oh, this is tough. Who came up with this one?
Me.
I mean, intersectionality, does that work?
Oh, yeah. That's a great word.
I mean, if I could co-opt it, I'm serious about that, because I try to discuss intersectionality in my class. Like, traditionally, we think of that term to help us understand the double jeopardies that people, let's say, of color and being a woman and being gay may experience. But I have found it useful in trying to dissect the complexity of whiteness, which I think often gets flattened out and often is ignored, right? And that's a big thing of what I do in my American ethnicity course, is try to describe the idea that there is, like, we seem comfortable talking about one's ethnicity, of how Hispanic they are or how Black they are. I was like, well, how white are you, and what does it mean to be white? So intersectionality, I'd say that, because I think there's, I would like to say I'm more than my most dominant majority traits
Mm-hmm.
of being a white cisgendered male, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that also awakens me to recognizing how influential and privileged those particular traits are in my overall makeup.
I think that's why I was thinking I wanted to bring in that aspect of what I know about you as a teacher, because you do teach in, about a music that isn't necessarily associated with white cisgender males. And I think that that's such a cool thing. I know that also you are a DJ, and you're very, you have a big passion for that kind of music. You also made me think of, I used to teach child psychology, and we did a unit on the development of ethnicity. And I had an exercise where I had the students first write down their ethnicity and then characteristics that they would put under that ethnicity. And then I adapted this from a colleague. Then I had them write the word not. So in other words, I would have written, I am Black, and I would write down characteristics. And then I would say, I am not Black, and ask them to write down characteristics. And the students that had the most difficulty with both aspects of that were the white students, because exactly what you said, Andrew, they haven't had to interrogate that before.
Sure. And I'll be the first to say that, I mean, I've been teaching at Northampton for 10 years, and I'm not the same person I am personally, nor as a teacher, than I was when I began. I think, quite honestly, I used to teach race objectively. Like, let's talk about race, like it's this thing like out there. And for me, the turning point was Michael Brown's killing in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. And teaching the class that fall as everything was unfolding. And we began to hear the trending phrase Black Lives Matter, made me understand where my whiteness fit into teaching this thing, and that's been an uncomfortable, ongoing process as I teach race. And I guess the only thing I've gotten comfortable about is I don't think I won't be fixed about what I think about this. And I'll constantly have to be challenged. Right.
Sure.
Well, that's kind of a perfect segue into the next question we were going to ask you, Andrew. And so, because Ferguson was a moment, but the last year has brought many more moments, and you don't necessarily need to speak to talking about issues relating to race or whiteness, but, George Floyd, I Can't Breathe, living amidst the pandemic, kind of the apex crescendo of the Black Lives Matter movement, the rise of white nationalism leading to insurrections and events in the United States. Has there been a change, in terms of how these world-changing events, living also amidst the pandemic, have impacted your classroom and changed the way you teach, either be it like material or just pragmatically in the classroom?
Absolutely. I still feel like I'm reeling, honestly. I think there are things that I've gotten accustomed to, some new things I have introduced, but there is an unease, like a lack of comfort that I have in these environments, even after training. And that is no fault of the training, and that's no fault of every little, bit of information or CTLT thing I have picked up and tried to do. There is something, I'm going to speak very broadly at first and then try to be a little more specific, Tom. There's something about this that in a world of higher ed, and I know anybody who may be listening to this, no matter what school that they are at, know that assessment is a big deal. And my question is, how are we assessing, honestly, the effectiveness and the impact of teaching completely online? It's not that teaching online is brand new, but it had always been taught, if you will, as the other, right? Like it had always been, it's like there's on-ground learning and then there's online. And in their world, they functioned very well, very effectively, without a doubt. That's one of the things I've learned on the fly, is that there's a lot of great strategies and techniques and ways to assess. However, when it becomes the dominant form of education, what does that mean for the students and for the institution? And I don't think anybody knows, because we had to pivot so quickly. And so that's a big part of my discomfort. Is I joke about sacrificing students on the altar of like my learning how to teach online, right? As well as their other experiences. Specifically, what has changed for me is that I had ingrained in me a punitive way of approaching assignments. Do this or you'll be punished. You'll lose points. This will happen, and I have largely dialed that down. It's still there because I've also discovered students are not comfortable unless they have the threat of something hanging over them.
True.
Because that's how they've been learned to learn. Yeah. But I am far less of if you don't do X, Y is going to happen during the pandemic, and I work more individually with the students to try to position them best for success, so that they're learning. This isn't about my arbitrary deadlines. Can you work on this? Is that possible in your life? It is. Then we can give an extension, or we can retool the assignment. One of the biggest things I've done, I provide choices, plethora of choices. So my learning outcome is being met no matter what the student decides their strength or comfort level is on what the assignment is, right? Because I've built in choices. So that's probably been and I think those are likely things I'll carry forward. I think that's been a benefit to the student.
Andrew, you and I are close in age. It's funny you were talking about choices. And did you happen to read Choose Your Own Adventures when you were a kid?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, those were my crack, and they would be very movie specific. And I love the idea of building your classrooms that way. I have a question though. I mean, like Gina referenced, obviously, you designed a very popular class that's been taught for many years at Lehigh University, Pass the Peas, the Sociology of Hip Hop. I know that obviously the class offerings have changed. Have you offered it since the COVID-19, like within the last year at Lehigh, or is that,
Yes, that has continued at Lehigh. I did my first time that online, which was terrific in the sense that there's for a class that's largely media based in terms of content. Listen to this music, watch these videos, etc. The access is immediate, and it can be pulled into the Zoom class or their assignments so much more easily than on ground. I had enjoyed that without a doubt. It's funny. I mean, Gina, you had mentioned you had left out, your Sociology of Hip Hop class. And it's like, well, why did I? Right? Like, I mean, thank you. And that's my assistant, who's me, semester after semester keeps looking at the paperwork required to offer this course at Northampton. And semester after semester, it keeps getting put to the bottom of the pile. And so I sometimes don't think of my Northampton role as Sociology of Hip Hop professor. It informs how I teach principles of sociology and American ethnicity. There are assignments in both sections that I use that are hip hop oriented, for lack of a better way to describe it. But it is also, I'll be honest, there's a certain stigma to still being associated with hip hop culture, whether or not it is is that like really a discipline, or you can study it, or, hip hop, that stuff they play at the strip clubs, right? Like, I'll never forget the first time, we go to our Lipkin days when they would introduce new faculty members in 2013 at our big theater at Northampton's main campus. And, my picture splashes up, and, the description is, and he teaches hip hop and he's a DJ. And, afterwards I walking down the hall. I don't know who this person was. And we come right by one another face to face. And they're like, so you're the hip hop professor, huh? And it was a loaded question.
Wow.
What was that? Were they curious? Was it dismissive? They didn't stop and kept walking. And so being a newbie at that time, it felt dismissive, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't an inquiry or I'm interested in hearing more. And so I've been, as a, someone who began studying hip hop under the banner of American Studies as an undergraduate and then sociology at Lehigh. it's been an uphill climb with this
Mm.
as a study and a discipline. So I sometimes, I admit I shy away from it because I love it so passionately.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't want to lose energy defending it because I
Mm-hmm.
know it works and it's helped create a tremendous amount of rewarding discourse for me and my students. So I don't really need to prove it to anyone, you know?
Right.
Right. Well, not
Right.
certainly not to
Yeah.
us, I think.
Yeah.
We're-
That makes so much sense too, that it's almost like you want to protect it because it's because it is so important to you. And it leads me actually to the next question too, because also developing a class, right? Getting it through all the bells and whistles and hoops that you have to in order to get a class on the books at our school is a lot of effort. And right now, any extra effort, with
Right.
all that we're going through, not only in the world, but in our personal lives, right? Making the adjustments to whatever we have to in our personal lives because of the pandemic, social distancing. Um, are you making any changes to the ways that you teach or engage with your classes to kind of protect yourself from burning out as a teacher? I know that I actually adjusted some of my assignments and the ways that I structure my assignments in my classes just to kind of make it easier for myself and also for the students, because as you say, Andrew, they're all now stuck the majority of their classes online. And this is different from back in the day when a student might, opt for online classes. And so that's their choice. And that's the modality they want to work in. But now there are students who would have never chosen this. And so are there ways that you are kind of trying to keep yourself from just completely burning out and making some concessions for yourself as well as for your students?
If there are, I'm not aware of them.
Oh.
No, this is it's tough to answer in, one of the snowiest Februaries that this area has seen.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, during this pivot to online, answering this question honestly in this moment, I do feel burned out in week 5, and I generally have a variety of safeguards, uh, um, as they say, guardrails to keep me from doing that. Right.
Yeah.
When we were teaching on ground, I have found it very difficult. Here's the thing that's easier. And this was, like I mentioned, sociology of hip hop. I'm finding this true for principals. The more and more content I provide online, there's less hand holding of getting assignments and content to my students and instructing them on how we're going to work on it. That
Mhm.
does seem to be streamlined. And
Okay.
that was sometimes things that, I don't know if you've ever lost an entire on-ground class to explaining something, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, hey, guys, this is a half an hour. Like, I'm so glad you have questions, but at some point you're just going to have to log on and find it yourself.
Yeah.
That has improved. For myself, I have the 7-day work week is a problem.
Yeah.
And I just took my first break this semester, this past Saturday,
Wow.
where I said, I'm not going to look at email this Saturday. And, I'm not comfortable with that because I hear their voices, in the ether, like,
Yeah.
please answer my question. And I want to log in and answer and then fall down that rabbit hole. But I did it out of what you're suggesting in your question, Gina. Like, we need to do this. It's the semester's it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So I want to be as fresh and available to them in April. One of the things that drives me nuts is the culture of the last 2 weeks, and whether it's like our colleagues, our administrators, or the students, everybody's like, well, I'm done. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what do you mean? Like, it's week 12. Like, I'm sorry. Like, we have some things to do here. But on the reverse of that, I do, Professor Randy Boone always chides me for this. I do have a celebratory last class, and I'm not a professor that that last class is like, we've got to get one more thing in, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, so I'm like, I try those were the balances that I exercised instinctively on ground. Haven't found my footing yet online.
Yeah, it's kind of goes back to what you were saying about the students have their expectations, and they kind of need those guardrails because they've learned, that they need these, whatever you want to call it, hatchets hanging over them, these deadlines hanging over them, because that's the way they've learned how to learn. But adjusting their expectations too, because I struggle with that as well. And I am someone who says no email, 1 day a week, kind of thing.
Sure.
And if and setting those expectations up front with my students, I think helps them. But yeah, then you have the colleagues who are on Slack with their students and texting with their students all the time, and it's like, I could never be that person.
Yes.
Speaking of Professor Randy Boone.
Right. Yes.
Well, actually, so Gina, you read my mind in terms of pivoting a little bit to talk a little bit about students, and burnout is one way that we can do it, obviously, because burnout is not just very real to us as professors, but certainly to our students as well. I knew I was burned out for two reasons, and Andrew, you'll appreciate this because they're both music related. One, I knew I was burnt out because I wasn't seeking out new music, if that makes any sense, in the sense that, like, I seek out new music to kind of keep me vibrant and alive, and it keeps me intellectually and emotionally engaged and active. And I was like, I found myself not looking back to the past and the comfort music foods of my past. And the other thing I did was I started putting music on in the background, like when I sleep silently. So this kind of both making me feel like an octogenarian and an infant, kind of lullabying myself to sleep and trying to experiment with sounds that wouldn't wake me up and jarring. So like choral music was out, and then I put on some ambient music, and I was suddenly sleeping in a planetarium. And so anyway, that's how I knew. And we've talked in the past in the show about my own struggles with burnout and mental wellness and self-care. So I feel for you in this very snowy February, and kind of like, wow, this is hard. And one way that I always, think about that too, though, is that this is also really hard on our students. And so I want to like kind of ask a question that puts kind of the students first. And so it's this, do you have a story you can share about a student, a single student, or perhaps something you're seeing in multiple students that you think speaks to the current moment we find ourselves in, and that you feel that other educators and teachers would benefit from hearing? And that might be a positive story. It could be a story about a student's success, but alternately, it could be a story about a particular challenge or set of challenges you see students facing that are barriers, to them having that success. That shows us maybe some of the work we still have left to do.
I often think of it in the collective, so I don't have, student A.
Bob.
But I do have, Bob. I do have a remarkable story in my American ethnicity class last fall. I was nervous about the American ethnicity shifting to online, because to talk about the social construction of race and how it impacts you and the world around us, etc. This took place in a classroom setting for me previously, where you didn't have the black mirror to hide behind. And so whatever you said, you had to kind of own within the group in real time, in flesh and blood. And I was concerned going in that the class would trend, this, I guess, certain pessimistic character of mine, I'm saying these things out loud. It would either be flatlined, right, where we really didn't touch anything with any particular depth, or worse, something contentious where people felt free to say whatever they want because there were no consequences. And through the laying down of a variety of, ground rules, safe space, and then through the very difficult, dropping my mask, my guise of, well, I'm in charge here. I once again was laid bare after George Floyd's murder and the ensuing protests and chaos, I was like, what can I teach, quote, teach anybody about race? Like, they're not the empty vessel, and I'm the fountain of knowledge. And so I approached the class by saying, I've constructed this class. We're in it together. And I'm learning as much from you. And I spent equal time in this one section with one-on-one Zooms as I did in the large-scale classroom.
Oh, wow.
And it paid dividends.
Wow.
Where we spoke the opening up and speaking personally by the end of the first month or so was an established norm in the class, so that when they did hit their own burnout or the end of the semester or struggles with group projects, they pulled through it. And it was really, really inspirational. I was really I'm getting caught up because it was a class where I felt like we transcended whatever the purpose of getting 3 credits are and meeting learning outcomes. We did something more than that. And
wow.
I was very humbled to be a part of that process.
I'm so curious about the one-on-ones. So were they based around projects or assignments, or were they literally like check-ins to create that sense of community? Because that's a conversation I've had with a few colleagues, is how do you build that sense of community online?
Yeah, it was 2 required ones. Obviously, everybody makes themselves in some shape, form, or fashion available, but 2 required ones. One was in the beginning of the semester, and that was essentially get to know you if I didn't have you for another class. Get to know me. What questions do you have for me? Why are you taking this class? What's on your mind? And then trying to draw out from them. And this week, I have to totally admit, this can cause burnout. I then try to finish the outline of my syllabus with specifics that they want to study and present on.
Oh, wow.
Right? So I have large scale subjects, and I say, where do you fall in these subjects in terms of your interests? And if you don't see something on there, what do you want to see? And then what can I then create as an assignment around, I'll be the first to admit, one of the things is sort of like modern Hispanic immigration is not something my course is strong with, right? Because we know Hispanic immigration in the early 1900s is very different than the story right now in the 21st century. And that's something that I was asked this semester. Can we really dive into that? And I was like, okay, I got to go back and do that. And then a midterm. My midterm is they do a written midterm, and then they meet with me to discuss that midterm.
Wow.
And we walk through that midterm. And those are the 2 required points. And that's a big, I wish I could, I thought about, can I do this for every class? It's just not possible.
Yeah. It's like you say, it's that load, that additional load. It sounds so incredible and what a great experience for the students, but oh my gosh, that expectation considering how many classes that you're teaching us a semester too. But it also brings me back to what you were saying about giving them choices. And so now I'm beginning to understand what you mean by giving them these options of what they're going to do in order to fulfill the requirements of the class. So that allowing them to choose their own adventure, choose their own topics that you're then going to flesh out teaching in the class. So I love that. Do you mind telling another example of options that you give them for assignments and maybe an outcome of one of those assignments? I mean, I hear that you were really, really, really moved and really happy with the outcome of that class, but can you think of another assignment that really sparked an amazing outcome for you?
I would say I use this also in my intro to sociology class as well. I call these assignments "The choice is yours," right? And it is a choice in terms of content, right? So they have, like, we've done 4 weeks of work. Which one do you want to double back on and do a deeper dive?
Okay.
Here are some further materials to dive in. Your presentation can be as straightforward as a paper, or you can record a video, or you could choose something creative. And this is something I've been doing pre-COVID that for a couple years now, is that I'm finding that creative manifestations of sociological thought go a long way in creating dynamic responses to what the material that they're experiencing. So that's how it is. It also, last but not least, it allows me to drive students to going to NCC student life events.
Oh, yeah.
And so one of the options is, we've got a dozen events this month. Go check them out and participate and respond to that. And so that puts, ideally students in those Zoom events.
Yeah.
And that is also, I've gotten a good response, because so many students are like, oh my God, there's a world outside of the 4 classes that I'm Zooming to. Like, this was really cool. I really got a lot out of it. And NCC's connected with the larger community and world. Like, so those, so it's almost like a Swiss Army knife assignment, right?
Yeah.
And allows for a lot of different types of learning, different types of learning style.
Definitely. And the ability to be creative, they have to do such high level thinking too, which is, of course, what we want our students to be doing. And we're tricking them into doing it by saying, do something that's fun to you. And that's a manifestation of your artistic side as well. And you mentioned also all of the events that are now Zoomable, which is another thing I hope we continue on after the pandemic. I think many people are saying this because, we have 2 campuses, and oftentimes an event might happen at one campus and not happen at the other campus. Well, now it's just Zoomable. And there was an event, I think it was last week, we had some an acrobatic and music troupe that were in Tanzania that we streamed. Right. And were you there at that event, Andrew?
No, I was not. That's Zuzu Acrobats. Is that correct? On Thursday night? Yes.
Yeah. Yep. And it was, that's amazing. So yeah, it's a great resource. There are obviously a lot of challenges with online, but in some ways it can be a really great resource.
Can I toot NCC's horn for a moment here? And this is
toot away.
This is no knock at other regional 4 years that I still have relationships with and still see their calendar of events. But we have done a remarkable job, particularly around Black History Month this semester, where I see at many far more well-resourced institutions, they have like the one event and it's a big deal. And there's a lot of solemnity around it and so on. We're doing what I think is meeting the times, is that we know that people are pulled in a million different directions. So give them a million different experiences, and the people that we're bringing from, members of George Floyd's family to, a production in Tanzania, an artist in Brooklyn, Betty Mae Fikes. From part of the civil rights movement. It's phenomenal. It really, really is. And there are recordings, so you can go back. We're doing a great job in that regard, and it makes me very proud to be a part of our institution.
Yeah, it has been really a wonderful month, and I think it was a case of people just really rising to the occasion, sure. and hopefully we'll continue to do it even when we are on ground, for sure.
Well, Andrew, I'm going to lob a scary question at you, but before I do, I'm going to pay you 2 huge compliments because they speak to actually what you were just talking about. The first relating to assignments, and the second actually relating to student life events. And I want to second your call to kind of congratulating the work that both student life as well as college life and faculty members bringing desired for events to them, which kind of created this amazing, February Black History Month, slot of events. One is, in the half decade I've been at NCC, I just want to say that I don't know another faculty member who has committed to encouraging and driving students to events that they may go to for extra credit or who knows, as
Mm.
part of a classroom assignment. And I watched them walk away from it like transformed by the event itself, having taken like your 3-credit class that was elevated beyond mere the earning of credits. That's so much of what happens in the fabric of kind of student life and other events that we bring to them. So I want to say thank you for that. The other is I know that you've taught writing intensive courses, probably social problems. I think might have been that, and actually one of our favorite guests who's visited us twice, who I know you know very well, Shanita Hubbard, I think was teaching it for the first time, and as she teaches in sociology, you kind of came in, and this also just speaks to your mentorship. You came to me in my role kind of as a dean and simply said, hey, so-and-so's teaching this. Can I give her these materials? And you provided me a stack of papers, relating to your writing intensive class that you had put together that was beautiful in its kind of attention to minutia in terms of having stepped through this process that I ended up stealing wholesale in my own gender studies class, which is, you gave that to me, I think, before I taught that class at NCC the first time, which was the only writing intensive class other than, regular English 1 and 2 classes. So I wanted to give a personal thank you as that ended up being so helpful for the students in terms of there was amazing data in there about how to source, how to put this together. And it really laid out a kind of large final writing project in stages. So you may have been giving that to someone else, but I benefited along the way. So I wanted to say thank you for both of those things.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I mean, it is much out of an impulse to assist my colleagues as it is of a sense of rebelliousness. I mean, listen, I love hip hop, I love sampling, and I believe intellectual copyrights are garbage. And so copyrights are often owned by not the producers of content themselves, and they benefit somebody else other than the creators. So I'm swimming upstream on that one. And I feel like there are other ways we can guarantee that people who create content get compensated. And I don't think copyrights is the only way to do it. So I often kind of fly in the face of those. I actually probably shouldn't be saying this.
No, you're fine. God bless you. I'm going to rewatch the documentary Searching for Sugar Man tonight after.
There you go. Yes, that's an excellent one. Right.
Well, so here's the scary question, and it's not really. I know because I know we talk about these, all the time. But what do you see as your biggest struggle as a teacher, and how are you working on improving and growing in that
area? That is a scary question.
I told you. That's why I buttered you up first.
I don't self-examine myself in the morning when I'm fresh with my colleagues. It's usually late at night staring at the ceiling where everything's all wrong. I think, I guess I'm going to give you, do you know what the flip side of that American ethnicity class is last fall? The other side of the coin is the American ethnicity class that I'm teaching this spring. My expectations naturally are really high for that class, particularly at a coming out of one in which the experience was transformative. And as everyone knows, every class I call it is a shake of the snow globe. You never know what you're going to get. And as a result, you can sometimes enter into a class with certain expectations. And so I'm a little wary of saying this, but hopefully I can see the eye through the needle here. I am not having that same experience in this spring's American ethnicity class. And one of the reasons is many of the students are not as what I would call academically oriented. And that simply means anything from time management to, where do I submit my assignment on Blackboard? There are students that is a fundamental challenge. And that's a part of my job. I don't have a problem doing that, but it also means it's more difficult to get to that next level when you're doing those kind of nuts and bolts. So I struggle with expectations, I would say. I am also, encountering for the first time a student with a decidedly different political viewpoint. And, hey, this is put your money where your mouth is. Like, if this is something that I'm going, I'm going to claim to be inclusive and so on, then I need to figure out how to incorporate decidedly different opinions into this class. I that said, there's a line. Okay, do we need any more lines after January 6th?
Yeah.
So
Right.
I'm also like, I'm at this point where one of the things another way to answer that question, Tom, is I struggle with complacency sometimes in teaching an objective discipline. Like
Mhm.
sometimes I'm like, damn, what, I wanted to be an English teacher a long time ago when I was in high school. Like, what, if I was an English professor, I'd just let rip. And I'm like, we're reading this, and you're going to see the world from this ideological point of view. I'm
That is
constantly
not what we do.
Oh, you should. And I, no doubt my class is slanted in some shape, form, or fashion, but I do spend a lot of time doing the both sides argument. And I'm not comfortable with that anymore. That, like, I definitely feel like that has contributed in many ways to the monster of division.
Amen.
Not like I'm trying to keep the peace, but like, no, like I'm not being emphatic enough about what is absolutely right or wrong.
Yeah, I have to jump in on that because of two things you said. The first being that, of course, every class is a unique snow globe. It's so true. And it can be so disheartening when you come off of a semester where everything is just like firing on all cylinders. And then you come to another semester where it's like
The
crickets.
snow globe has like
Or,
half the water's
Yeah.
evaporated away. It's a little
right,
sorry looking.
right, right. The other is I am so with you on this idea of objectivity and perspective
What
in the
aboutism?
classroom. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm teaching health psychology this semester, and so the class is framed on COVID. I mean, it can't.
Sure.
I feel like it would be unethical of me for that
Of
not to
course.
be at the forefront of a class on health and psychology, on physical health and psychology. And so one of their first assignments was to read an article, which I've tried to do my reading, and I had thought it was a pretty objective rundown of how it spread in our country versus other countries. And similar to what you said, Andrew, I had a couple, most of the students, and I was asking them to identify the biological, the psychological, and the sociological aspects of the spread of the virus. And two students took issue with the article, one of which because of the website it came from, and the other felt it was too critical of our former president. And so decoupled themselves from the actual factual information in the article and instead took issue with the fact that they felt that it was partisan to point to factual information. And it
Hmm.
was I really had a little dark night of the soul with that. A part of me just wanted to yell at them, I'm not going to lie, and
Mm-hmm.
the other part of me took the very reasoned stance of um if you feel that there is anything inaccurate in this article, I really hope you bring it to my attention. I really tried to find something that I felt like had a lot of basis, had a lot of reputable sourcing, and neither of them came back to question anything that was in the article. But part of me did want to just like, ah.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah.
this isn't the. Yeah, we could. There's been so many articles written about both sidism, what about aboutism in the news, as we're seeing now. And by the way, isn't it lovely to say former president? Like former is my new favorite word since
Works for me.
since January 20th. We made it to January 20th. There was a question mark about that.
Yeah.
But Andrew, to your point though, I will say this, and so like you want to have both sides, and I've and so like here's what I found to be helpful in that moment is that oftentimes that really extreme viewpoint that maybe came out of left field, and one of the issues is sometimes you want that to allow it to be represented, but you also don't want it to sometimes threaten or intimidate other students in the class who feel like their voices might themselves be shut down. I don't know if that's the scenario that's happening in that class, but like one thing I have found is oftentimes when like it doesn't need to be far right versus far left. Oftentimes it's pointing out that this extreme position this is an inclusive classroom, and oftentimes in my experience, that position is not itself inclusive, and you can kind of have a discussion about who is being excluded in that given position and ask to support that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that
Absolutely.
itself, that the exclusionary aspects of that become the foundation, which is that rather than say, oftentimes if the viewpoint is well, we shouldn't include people in this, is to flip that on its side and say, well, who's not being excluded, and what's the reasoning behind that? Who's speaking for them? So we can, I think, and there's a million ways that I could see that taking shape. I mean, there's the movement now yesterday in the news about the move to ban, transgender men and women from sports within their own gender right now. And I could see how that could become this kind of conversation. So I didn't mean to take that in a different direction, but it's sorry.
No,
Andrew,
no.
I see one.
What pops into my mind is, and this goes back, I've done some work on this in having the privilege of being a white male professor in a hip hop classroom. I've presented this a paper, and it's largely qualitative research along the experiences of that unique position. And yet it's not unique, right? Like, we know that white people dominate the pedagogy in higher ed. And so what I have struggled with a little bit, and I was not always aware of this. This is what I said, like this, we learn from teaching, and it's been over the last 10 years, I've become far more aware of this, is that if I'm not careful, there is this element of me, I just going to use the word exploiting Black trauma in particular, or trauma of any marginalized group, and receiving a paycheck for it. And I'm not okay with that, right? Like, so if things remain the same, I continue to teach the way that I've always taught, which is comfortable to me, which people know me for and applaud me for, but it is not necessarily moving the needle in terms of social change, right? And so the last, I've honestly, it began to be clearly articulated with the Black Lives Matter movement for me. The last several years, like I have purposely, examined agency and where the individual has it and where we have it as a collective, as a group of people. And to me, that work is really important. I will be the first to say one of my mentors in that is Professor Hope Horowitz and her social work program, because that is essentially one of the things that she is teaching. Like, where can we make a difference amongst, these macro institutions that are bearing down on the less fortunate and the less resourced. And so that's a big part of my course now. And I a big reason why I steer them to NCC events, because we need to do something than watch a TED Talk or read an article. You need to see people and hear their voices as they are as human beings. And so that's, I don't know where that came from, but it was kind of in response, I think, to your suggestion, Tom, is that, like, that's definitely something I need to keep pursuing.
Well, this is so great, Andrew, that you circled back to hip hop and your pedagogy around it, because that was something that actually our producer, Kelly, had wanted to circle back to, which is this. I kind of want to give you that opportunity to answer that person who walked by you in the hallway and said, "Oh, you're the hip hop professor," right? I want to give you a platform to explain, and I think you actually just did it really beautifully, but to explain how and why hip hop not only should be a discipline in an academic area, but how it's such a powerful way to do exactly what you said, to demonstrate the ways in which people have found agency through this music. And I mean, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, awesome. That's funny. I wish I could have that moment back,
Maybe
but
they'll listen.
Yeah. But those are also formative moments, right? Like, where you get that little bit of a chip on your shoulder, and it drives you a bit. And so I don't regret not saying anything, because it's made me reflect deeper. For myself, like, one of the things that some of my professors, my father pointed me towards when I started studying hip hop in the 1990s was, well, go look at what they were studying about blues and jazz in the 1960s and 70s. And they faced the exact same, particularly, macro theorists don't have much room for cultural production, meaning a difference in people's lives. Like if you don't have the resources, you're just, the people are screwed. And I what I discovered was, how could, a bluesman on a train going from Mississippi to Chicago, how could that say something about American life and American agency? And just with a guitar and three chords. And it most certainly did, because, right, we know that individuals like that who picked up and moved and sang their songs about moving to the North represent a great shift in American life in the 20th century. And the blues, when you listen to these songs, I like to say are like a, and it's true for hip hop as well. It's not a mirror reflection, right? But it's like a funhouse mirror. Like certain things are amplified and distorted, but so is my life. Look at that person who walked down the hallway with me and said that. Like they have this larger than life. If I found that person, they're probably like, what? It was just a passing comment. It may not have meant anything. But that's what I think is fascinating about, Tom, you'll jump in on this, right? About the arts, about literature, about performance, is that I'd like to say, what I say often is when we study hip hop music, the lyrics, the way it is presented and represented, these aren't facts, but sometimes it's the truth, and what can we understand better about our lives and the lives of others through that kind of lens?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's such a great way to put it. It's the truth, because I watched a documentary yesterday about these 4 women artists who record under the name Our Native Daughters, and they are all Black women who play banjo. And they're reclaiming the history of the instrument, which was an instrument that was brought to the United States by enslaved people, and then was basically, again, the funhouse mirror reflected it back as a white instrument associated with white music. And so you're saying,
it's Our Native Daughters.
Our Native Daughters. Yeah, I cannot recommend their music highly enough. They're absolutely amazing. So
we are seeing that even Valerie June. There's a whole string of artists that you're absolutely right, and that's really cool. I didn't think about that, Gina.
Yeah, in the folk arena. So, well, I'm gonna pivot to asking you about thinking. I mean, you've kind of talked already about being a student and taking your first sociology class and going, oh, there is actually something to this. But are there other things that you recall from being a student that have really informed your teaching and how you think of yourself as a teacher?
Well, yeah, no, most definitely. When people talk about, what were your formative educational experiences, they were with teachers and professors who took me under their arm, or wing. Sorry, whatever. And I was a father at an early age. I discovered I was going to be a father entering my sophomore year in college, and my girlfriend, now my wife, was going to move up to college with me, and I was going to finish my degree as we tried to figure out our lives. At the age of 19 and 21, we were going to get it all figured out.
Oh, sure.
And without a variety of professors mentoring me and taking interest. Not only taking interest in me and my particular situation and my family, but then, oh boy, this is a project. This guy likes hip hop. We've got nothing like this that anybody's ever done here before. There isn't a whole lot of literature out there on this, but like we know he's passionate about it, and we're going to keep steering him in that direction. Those were very important moments for me. And so, it gets back to like the Zoom one-on-one meetings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do I do those? Because I know those things matter.
Yeah.
And so I think not every discipline sort of affords those kind of opportunities, but if it can, I think it's really, really important, whether on ground or online.
Yeah.
And that was obviously, you're speaking about Bard. That's where you were an undergraduate.
That's correct.
And I think it's worth the shout out, because Bard is, Bard is I know you know this, having gone there, is a very unique college and environment that does foster, I think, a lot of independent thinking and ideas. I mean, I think they pride themselves on that, and I know that you and I shared a student who just is attending Bard now.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so and who I we supported them along their journey, and so it was really cool to kind of, I'm sure it was cool for you to kind of pass that on and watch an important student kind of
Can
move
I give
on
a
from their
shout
own
out to that
alma
student
mater.
real quick?
Absolutely.
Please do.
That's a specific success story, because that student was much farther left than I am, and really began to challenge me in 2016 and 2017 in the classroom, respectfully, but persistently, that there were elements of fascism that were being evidenced in the former president's administration and in American discourse. And I pushed back on it each time. I was like, not in America. Like, it's awful, but not in America. And then on January 6th, I contacted them, with like that Darth Vader line, you were right. Like I really have learned a lot from that student by pushing me. But as I said, they always did it respectfully. Like,
Yeah.
and I can't thank them enough for being persistent in their beliefs, but they listened to me as well. And it was a great back and forth. And to me, that's what this is all about.
I love the
I love it.
bravery of some of our students that push us, and
Mhm.
and it's inspiring, and it's great when they prove us wrong in some aspects, because
Yes.
part of the joy of teaching is that we're constantly learning. Like you said earlier, we're constantly growing and changing as teachers. So I'm so sorry that we're coming to, we only have a few minutes left, but this is supposed to be a fun question. And so
I've been having fun.
Yeah, so we'll end on a fun
It might
question.
be less fun in COVID times. I can see how the answers to this could grow increasingly darker.
Well, the question is, what is a guilty pleasure that faculty don't know about you? And I always then, in my long-winded way, say, don't feel guilty. If it gives you pleasure, don't feel guilty. So it's your
Yes.
non-guilty pleasure.
We need to rid ourselves of this puritanical tyranny. All right?
Exactly.
Right?
Thank you.
Besides my half a pint of Ben and Jerry's every day,
That's it. I hear you. Talenti.
That they don't know about. Well, it's funny. One of our producers, Jeff, knows this pretty well about me, and others have you've heard the jokes made. But like, I'm a pretty passionate sports fan, sports fan, and the issue is, well, why, right? Like, why would I wrap myself up in a reference group that I know like does not care about me at all? Like objectively speaking, I know has no stake in my life, but I'm investing myself in it, right? I tell you, one of the things that inspires me about listening to sports talk radio and sports journalism is that they're doing the equivalent of teaching principles of sociology and intro to psychology every semester 3 times, right? Like, it's the same storylines, it's the same, winners and losers, and these men and women present their material with passion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's yet another quarterback controversy for the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, how many times have we heard this? But they bring it about. They bring it about in such a way that, like, as a listener, if you're into this stuff, you're drawn in. And I try to emulate that in my classroom. That enthusiasm of like, I have talked this subject to death, but these students haven't heard it. Just like, and so I envision them sometimes like listeners. So a guilty pleasure of mine is like, I spend a lot of time tracking professional sports and reading sports journalism and listening to sports talk radio. And it does nothing to boost my IQ, but it does. It does provide me with a certain source of inspiration.
Yeah. It shouldn't be. I see one of our producers, Jeff, is saying "Boo, Patriots." So we don't want to get into into a controversy.
Nothing to be said.
I love that, Andrew. I have a very specific thank you to say to you, though, because I can see you via Zoom right now, but our audience can't, since this is an audio format. and you're beaming to us from your house, surrounded by an incredible vinyl collection. But what I noticed mid-interview is that you're also wearing a tie. And I would like to say that not all of our guests show me and Gina that respect, and well, they should.
Absolutely. It's a part of putting my uniform on. If I'll extend the metaphor, is that it gets me in a good mental place. I've tried to go to Zoom meetings with my hoodie on, and I basically want to pull the hoodie over my eyes and turn the camera off. And so this is it's just a part of what I've always done, and it helps me rise to the occasion.
That's great. I'm so glad you pointed that out, Tom.
And you guys deserve it too.
My uniform on Zoom is a scarf. That's my uniform.
The signifier. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
I desperately want to grab my hoodie and throw it over my head and say, "Would but this hoodie were a time hoodie." That is a deep cut from Community in the Dean. So I'm sticking with that. And there will be like one person listening to this podcast, maybe two, who will have a guffaw at that, and everyone else will look perplexed.
Community cut. I watched a little bit of it. It kind of cut close to the quick, you know.
It's the best shows to it. It did at times. Yes. Professorson.
Yes. Yep.
Oh God.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. This has been so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. The time and opportunity, and the thoughtfulness of the questions, and also to our producers that lurk in the background, keep us pointed in the right direction.
Absolutely. Yes.
Here.
Give it up for
Kelly.
Jeff
Thank
and
you,
Kelly.
Jeff.
Well, take care, and I look forward to the day when we get to see each other in person.
Yeah, absolutely. My best to you both.
Pedagogy a go-go. Pedagogy go-go-go.
Well, Gina, I want to say thank you again to our guest, Professor Andrew McIntosh, not only because he wore a tie to his visit with us remotely today. Bless the man. He has been a huge support, ally, and friend to me in my 5 years. So it was a real special chance for me to have him on the show and get to talk to him a bit about him and his work in the classroom.
Yeah, Andrew's such an engaged colleague as well as an engaged professor, and it was a real pleasure to talk to him. And I'm so now I really want to help him bring his Sociology of Hip Hop class to Northampton, because I want to take it for free. And so
this is it. Let's do it. Let's team touch it. We'll bring in people like I think that this has momentum behind it, Gina. I think we can make this happen.
We'll sign a petition. Bring hip hop sociology to NCC. Well, we need a better slogan. That wasn't a very good.
Sloganeering in the moment. Sloganeering. Ooh, I like that. It sounds like a Radiohead B-side. No, I want to also just, Andrew is he is defined, and I don't know how this will come across in the podcast, but he's defined in many respects by his humility. But he is marked by incredible generosity, and it reflects itself in his mannerisms within the classroom. But generosity in terms of the colleagues, he's active in his community. I know that for a fact, but also in the college community as well. And his personal outreach to our part-time faculty, adjunct faculty, has truly been extraordinary. So we're incredibly lucky to have him.
Great. Well, what a great first episode to start off the 2021 with.
I'm excited to see everyone next month.
All right. See you next time.
I'll see you next time, Gina. Hey, thanks for listening to Pedagogy a Go-Go, recorded in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Our podcast daydreamer/showrunner is Kelly Allen, and Pedagogy a Go-Go is produced by Jeff Armstrong. If you've got any questions, please send them to pedagogyagogo@gmail.com. Our social media handle is @pedagogyagogo, and you can stop by our website at www.pedagogyagogo.com for copies of podcast transcripts, guest assignments, and other useful tidbits. Keep in mind there are no hyphens or dots in any of the above web addresses. Until next time, this is Gina and Tom saying, take care and teach well.